I represent our guest, Francesca Borri. She's Italian journalist. Your first experience was in Balkans War, yeah, and where you work as a human rights officer. Then you were in the Middle East, especially in Israel, Palestine, and also Iraq. And finally, from the last 2 years, you are in Syria. And Dimitris Christopoulus, professor of the political science at the University of Athens, and since 2013, vice president of the International Federation of Human Rights. My first question will be to Francesca, because I want to start our discussion in Syria. And I wrote in one of your articles that you wrote that Aleppo is nothing but hunger and Islam. And also you described the war. Just a second. This is a dirty war, a war of the last century. It is war between rebels and loyalists who are so close that they scream at each other while they shoot each other. The first time on the front line, you can't believe with these bayonets you have seen only in the history books. Today's wars are drone wars, but here they fight meter by meter, street by street, and it's fucking scary. I would like to ask you about your experience in Syria.
Well, it's 3 years and a half that I've been covering Syria. You know, when I arrived in Syria the first time, we arrived, because I wasn't alone at the time. Journalists weren't kidnapped at the time. We were just covering the Arab Spring, and we were just thinking, you know, this is like Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, a few weeks and Assad will go. We weren't ready at all for what happened. Nobody could expect such a war. And the only difference compared to 4 years ago is that now I don't cover Syria, only Syria anymore. Now I'm based in Baghdad and I cover Syria and Iraq. And now I cover also Kurdistan. And this tells a lot about the responsibility of all the international community in this war. Every time you go back, you think, okay, I will never see something worse than this. And then the next time is always, always worse than the time before. For example, now tomorrow, I fly to Istanbul, to Turkey, then I will try to cross in again. And now we have even Russia, even Putin. I mean, it's really a nightmare.
But the article I recalled was written 2 years ago, and at this time you said that the journalist failed, that no one knows where is Damascus, and no one knows what is going on in Syria. And after 2 years, we face the problem of the refugees that are coming to Europe. What happens in these 2 years? Why we are, you know, we had closed eyes? Why?
Well, I turned to journalism 3 years ago with Syria. In my past life, I was a human rights officer. So it's an easy answer. Do you really think that a young freelancer new to journalism can cover Syria and do what altogether the BBC, Le Monde, Guardian aren't able to do? Do you really think that I'm the only one who has such strong relationships with jihadists on the ground to be able to not to be kidnapped? I don't think so. The truth is that nobody since the beginning had a real interest in covering Syria. And in some specific moments, this was very, very clear, where it was really impossible, for example, for a long time to tell the truth about barrel bombs or other many issues, jihadists at the beginning. This is, when I say, you know, it's last year I got the major prize for war journalism for a reportage on Aleppo that went unpublished except for Le Monde. This is journalism today. You get a prize, but you don't get readers. It's totally stupid. And when I'm told, you know, oh, you are translated into 19 languages, you got this prize, it's amazing. Well, it's been the really failure the worst years of my life, because, you know, I don't care in the end, I don't care if readers don't know where Syria is and still don't know who Bashar al-Assad is. Sometimes, you know, I meet readers everywhere and they say, oh, so it's, how is going in Syria, how is going with Gaddafi? I mean, really the confusion is amazing. The point is, I care for Syrians, because what we write, and especially what we don't write, deeply affects what's going on the ground. Think, for example, in these weeks, one of the most difficult things to write about is secular people in the Middle East. So trying to convince that there are not only Sunni and Shia everywhere, and there aren't only terrorists and jihadists. Baghdad, for example, Baghdad is a secular city, mostly secular city. Young people in Baghdad are exactly like us in Europe. There is no way to write a piece on secular Baghdad, and consider that it's since July that Baghdad is demonstrating not only every Friday, but every day for a new government, because they say that their government, corruptions and everything else is at the roots of the Islamic State. And we totally neglect what young Iraqis are saying. We just think that we will bomb the Islamic State and we will go, and unfortunately it won't go with their strikes.
Despite the readers, there are the person like Dimitris that cares about the human rights. Dimitris, can you tell us your point of view? Because I've read information about the refugees that are going to Jordan 2 years ago. I read the information also in the articles of Francesca, how many people are already killed. What about the human rights organization in Europe? How they react on that kind of data?
Thank you for the question. I just read, that's why I opened my laptop, that 2 hours ago the Greek authorities had identified the bodies of 13, and they still in search of other 3 dead people after 2 wrecks that took place last night at the Aegean Sea at the border. So, which makes that on Thursday we had a wreck of 6 and now 13. And this is no new. I mean, I'm still a little bit in the discussion about the media. This will bother the Greek public opinion for a few hours, and maybe the European also public opinions. And death is trivial. Death is banality. We still remember the picture of the small Kaylan who drowned himself at the end of summer. And after the picture, nothing. It was just a picture. And ever since, it keeps happening, and it will not stop. So given the fact that it will not stop, I consider that we need to do something. I mean, you cannot familiarize yourself with death that easy, unless you do. The possibility of doing it is also there. So if you cannot carry the moral burden of familiarizing yourself with the fact that people die in order to cross the sea borders, the blue borders between Greece and Turkey, then you have to do something. What you have to do, and this is now where the discussion about human rights might come, you need to assure that the asylum seekers, call them refugees, call them whatever you want, I don't care now, will have the opportunity of being transferred in safe corridors under the supervision of the EU, or at least the supervision of member states of the European Union, after certain agreements with transit countries and certain agreements of relocation within the European Union. That is very difficult to happen. That's very difficult to happen in the sense that this actually radically subverses, changes the dominant paradigm of migration and refugee management, which is the one we have been following in Europe over the last 25 years. And this paradigm is based on the idea that we build borders, so restriction and borders control, militarization of borders, external borders of the European Union, risks of deaths through pushbacks by the portal authorities and so on. And as far as the inside is concerned, there is a whole discussion about integration of migrants. So I guess if you Google the term migration and integration, you will find some billion references from documents of the European Commission and so on. So that was until yesterday, actually virtually speaking until yesterday, the dominant approach within the European Union. Restriction at the borders, risks of exterminating the population which decided to cross the borders irregularly, and that's it. What is the positive side in the agenda today is that for the first time after 25 years, we see that this dominant pattern, which was the monopoly, let's say, over migration policy in Europe, is not anymore a monopoly. We see that this model is shaking. Why? Because reality brought us before the radical need to revise some things that we have been doing over the last years. So it's not that the European elites are more philanthropic today or more moralist, but it's only because reality sometimes is so hard to deal with that some of us understand that the reality cannot change and they change their minds. Some of us believe still that instead of changing our minds, reality will change. So these obsessions, of course, still dominate a very important part of the political elites in countries of all the countries of the European Union, particularly the case of countries of Central Europe and Eastern Europe. The happy, optimistic point in the agenda is that some of the governments, and particularly a part of the conservative elites in Germany, which is the country which is dominating the whole agenda, they try to see it in a different way. There is a big discussion why Merkel is revising or is trying to reconsider the basic assumptions of refugee management and migration management. A lot of people in many parts of Europe, particularly in my country, they will not trust this shift. I will not agree with that. I'm happy that I see a change which might offer us a new perspective, a new horizon in Europe when it comes to the refugee crisis. That is an ongoing struggle. The result of the struggle, I think, is very hard to be identified yet. But at least it is the first time we discuss the matter, and we do it, of course, because reality obliges us to do, in the most brutal way. I'm not able to tell you where we're going to be in a year from now, but there are good reasons to hope that if Merkel continues to face the most conservative parts of the German public opinion and the most conservative parts of her own party, that might offer the European Union the possibility to shift to a new agenda, which will not be the agenda of restriction, which will not be the agenda of closed borders and so on. But of course this needs an honest discussion between the member states, a sincere debate between the member states, in order to achieve a minimum of proportional and equal burden sharing, relocation of the population, resettlement, a good agreement with Turkey, and so on. I don't know where we're going to be, I insist, but at least it's worth trying today, because we see that this agenda that dominated absolutely the European political discourse and narratives about migration until a few months ago is not any more than dominant.
I want to make one step back, because I think that it's very important to understand why the refugees are coming to Europe. Can you tell us, Francesca, why?
Well, there are many reasons why they are coming now. Because first of all, let's remember that most of the refugees, and I'm not speaking only of the war in Syria, but worldwide, most refugees, as we know, live in bordering and neighboring countries. So why now they're coming to Europe? Many reasons. First of all, of course, it's summer, so it's safe to try to cross by sea. Then actually smugglers smell the business. So now smugglers in Turkey are well organized, you know, with Facebook, social networks, and they go into refugee camps. They look a little bit like, you know, walking travel agents. I mean, they offered, like offering, you know, a holiday package. So smugglers realized they could, you know, it was a really business. So of course, you know, there are also these kind of reasons. But actually, what went totally unnoticed? We know very well Turkey, and we know very well Syria. Turkey is a real state. I mean, Turkey is not a failed state. The police and the army control the border very well, and journalists know it, you know, perfectly, because, for example, when we entered Kobane, illegally, of course, because the Kurdish areas are, you know, totally controlled. When we came back from Kobane, we were all arrested, so it was impossible to cross a Kurdish border without being noticed, you know, by the Turkish police. I was arrested in December like everybody else. While when you cross the border, as I do normally in Arab provinces, which means the Islamic State roots and Islamic State or jihadist smugglers, I mean, nobody arrests you, nobody stops you, nobody looks at you, and Turkey is a NATO member country. The point is, Turkey controls its territory, so why Turkey let refugees leave? And it's very easy to understand. It's because, you know, there are the elections now, all what's going on with Erdogan, and his internal struggle for power, his internal struggle, you know, with the Kurds and with Islamic State, his ambiguity toward Islamic State, I mean, some troubles with the United States. So this is as for Erdogan, as for Turkey. But what about Syria? It was impossible to leave Syria, and consider that most of the refugees come from the area around Damascus. They don't come from northern Syria. Those who say, I'm from Aleppo, come from Turkey. They were already in Turkey and now they're coming to Europe. They are not coming directly from Aleppo because, you know, those who stay now stay. I mean, in Aleppo countryside. They are not going to move anymore. All these refugees, all the Syrians come from Damascus countryside. And when we noticed that, for example, a passport in July, a Syrian passport, was really hard to get it. You had to apply in Damascus, and it was almost impossible to reach Damascus. And then it was $1,500. Now it's $800 suddenly. Now you can apply for a passport also in a refugee camp, also abroad, and you get it really in a few times. So why? Now we know it, because actually, probably this is the most likely explanation, Bashar al-Assad was trying to empty the city and empty the countryside of young men who might join the rebel ranks now that, you know, the rebels are approaching, both jihadists and Islamic State are approaching Damascus. And so now it's clear that Assad was somehow preparing the ground for the Russian intervention. But again, this is a story that when we pitched it to newspapers, nobody wanted to publish it. When we said, hey, there is something strange going on in Syria, because now suddenly Syrians are free to leave, and nobody cared.
Yeah.
I think a very big truth lies here on the fact that, as you very well said, the majority of the refugee population actually remain around the country. And that is not only the case with Syria today, that is always the case when you have wars or conflicts that lead to increase of refugee flows. This comes absolutely in full contradiction with the dominant idea here in this part of the world, in Europe I mean, that everybody is coming to our houses. Bullshit. People, the Afghans, they are in Iran, the Syrians, they are in Jordan, in Lebanon or Turkey, and some of them, hopeless after years remaining there, that they cannot go home, decide to make the big journey. The number of the people who manage to cross the EU borders and get to Greece and then take the road to the north is still a minority of the total refugee population which resides around Syria. I'm saying that not only for encyclopedic reasons, but in order to deconstruct the dominant idea in many capitals of the European Union, according to which these people are here and they are invading our territories. We are talking about 40, 50, 60, maximum 1,060,000 of people to be relocated within the European Union. The discussion started last year with 40, and I hope that when our children in the future will be reading these numbers out of the total of the 4 million who have lost their houses and their lives, they will feel ashamed about us. And that is something to say, that is something to underline in the current dominant European narrative about migration. We tend to believe that everybody comes here. No. All the poor people, we believe, come here. We associate, traditionally, the refugees and the migrants with poorness. That is partially correct, but it's more wrong. Why? Because always the poor remain home. The guys who come here are not the poorest. The poor do not have even money to go anywhere. The poor are staying at their origin. And that is particularly the case with the Syrians today. That partially explains why within the European Union the Syrians are de facto and gradually de jure in law more welcome than the others. Because these are middle-class people. These are people who, in the eyes of societies such as the Greek one, are easier to identify with. So this creates already a difference between them and people with refugee profile from Central Asia, Africa, and so on. So, cynically speaking, the European Union today has admitted, to a certain extent, that the Syrians is a good case for us, cynically speaking. Although we do not recognize it, we do not officially admit it, although, of course, the German Minister of Interior the other day, when he was trying to campaign for welcoming refugees, he did not use moralist arguments. He said that we need these people because we are an aging society, we need to fill our social security funds, we need people to work for our development, and so on, so on. So in practice, the whole traditional dichotomy between the refugee and the irregular economic migrant is not that obvious as it used to be in the 50s.
You said that the poor people stayed there in Syria or the border countries. So who is coming to Europe?
I think you're much better placed to say that. I know that generally, as a general trend in migration flows, the poorest always stay at home. the poorest Poles remained in Poland in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century. The others went to America. That was the case with, that is a rule, let's say, of the migration flows. And I think this rule is simply confirmed today in Syria.
It's totally true. The poor and the poorest of the poor are in Syria, and as I was told, I remember 2 years ago by displaced inside Syria, they told me to be refugees is a luxury we can't afford, because they didn't have $100 to pay the fuel for a car to the border with Turkey. And if you reach Turkey, if you cross the border, if you have the money for a smuggler, in any case you just stop in some refugee camp on the border. It's not only a matter of money, it's a matter of, skills in general terms. So the poor are not here. This is really the middle class. And I decided to cover the wave, last refugee wave, because I'm Italian, so I'm used to see dead children, honestly, on the beach and people swimming in the summer since ever. So this new refugee wave, I decided to cover it from Hungary and Greece. And speaking Arabic is very funny because I was like, after so many months, I was among Syrians again, because when I'm in Syria now, I'm among foreigners. So for a while I could feel at home again, because we were all from Aleppo, all from Baghdad, so talking and chatting, and they were all young engineers, young doctors, young economists. Then, of course, a BA in engineering in Damascus University is not the same in Oxford, and we agree, but this is definitely the middle class. And the reason why I decided to cover this refugee wave from Greece is because, for me it's been quite, every time suddenly Syria makes again the headlines, it's strange for me because it's 2 years that I'm the only journalist in rebel-held Syria, so I'm used to total indifference, and when suddenly there is a gas attack or something like that, and suddenly the world cares Syria, I'm quite skeptic. And so I decided to cover it from Greece, because Greece, I think, nobody in Greece can really believe in the generosity, of Europe. Greece, what we Europeans are doing to Greece is shameful. If we speak, of another crisis, the crisis of Greece, forget all the responsibility of the Greek people, of the Greek governments, it's shameful, because we have a country, in poverty. It's just for Italians, it's in front of us. We are used to spend our summers in Greece, and nobody cares. Italian weeklies, I remember Italian magazines, the titles is all the recommendations to profit from the Greek crisis and to buy for nothing all the luxury apartments in Athens or on the islands. This is the only way Italians care about Greece. So I decided to cover the refugee crisis from Greece, because I think here it's quite hard to believe that suddenly, especially Germany, is generous with other people. And I was right, actually, because, I remember when I read for the first time, probably you read it also, that in Germany Germans are offering a room in their houses to migrants. Well, then I just Googled the website. Yes, they are offering a house, but actually it's not for free. It's a room for rent, as usual. The only difference is that it's not the refugee or the migrant to pay the rent. There is a crowdfunding initiative, but in any case, the owner of the house gets his rent anyway. So I don't see anything particular, any generosity, in this. Actually, I see a particular form of racism in this idea that you are very nice because you are taking in your house a refugee. He's paying a rent like everybody else, so what? What's the news? That you accept in your house a refugee? It's quite racist. It's the opposite of the news that, went on newspapers. And then the same when I read, for example, Ireland, that 12,000 people in Iceland were offering their house to Syrians. Well, do you know how many asylum seekers got asylum in Iceland since the beginning of the war 4 years ago? 13 Syrians. 37 refugees at all. So actually, this is not generosity at all. And it's like Italy. Italy is not very open to migrants. I mean, the only place where we welcome migrants and refugees, unless they are rich people, it's the tomato fields where they work in slave-like conditions. This is Europe. And I found very racist, you know, our Western Europeans' attitude toward Hungary, toward Eastern Europe, because we were ready to say, oh, you know, that's Eastern Europe, there is no democracy, they are not used to democracy, while, you know, in Italy, in Germany, no. In Italy is the same, in Iceland is the same. I mean, the point is, Germany welcomes refugees because Germany needs workforce. The European Union, I mean, Europe needs 42 million new Europeans in the next 5 years, so we need migrants. And if we see in Germany, usually foreign workers pay 4,000 every year, 4,000 euros more than what they get in social services. So of course, we need workforce. And we say, I don't know, 1 million people or 2 million people, and then we close the door. So I didn't see anything new. Even if there is one thing I agree with him, of course, that in this bleak picture, it's not true that nothing is changing. And even if as journalists we must be ready to say, hey, come on, you are offering a room for rent, there is nothing new actually. And if there is something new, is that in Germany now, you know, since Airbnb is going very well, and so the price of everybody's, you know, giving for rent to tourist rooms, that's why the government now introduced a new law. You can't give your room for rent to tourists for more than 60 days per year, and that's why it's better now to have a refugee. So let's give the complete picture about the generosity of German citizens. The point is, even if our duty as journalists is to underline these things, the point is, it's not true that there is nothing new, because this, in any case, is for the first time European citizens see these refugees, meet these refugees. And even if, you know, I was asked to write an article about a young couple from Milan, they took their car and they went to Budapest to bring a Syrian family to Vienna. And my question to the director of my newspaper was, okay, and then in Vienna, where in Vienna they will drop this Syrian family? In the street, and then they go back to Milan? What kind of story it is? I refuse to write this kind of story. It's not a story. Unless they take them with them in Milan, and I mean, otherwise for me it's no story at all. But the point is, something is changed, because in February, when I was in Italy for a few days, I thought, you know, I have a niqab and everything to go in Syria unnoticed. And I thought, okay, let's see, since, you know, Europeans are afraid of this wave of potential Islamists. So let's see what happens if you walk around Florence in Tuscany, my hometown, for all the day under a niqab. It was a few days after Charlie Hebdo, so my newspaper, you know, was sure about the panicked reaction of Italians. Italy is a bit like Poland, you know, it's a Christian country, we are not very used to migrants, it's not like London or like France or Germany. So I had a cameraman, you know, hidden behind me, and then actually nothing happened. I was totally covered. It's something I can tell you not frequent in Florence, not even in Rome, nowhere in Italy, and nothing happened. Then I started a little bit to provoke people. You know, I remember in front of the Dome, so the major tourist attraction of Florence, where really a suicide bombing would be a great idea. So I asked a policeman at 1 p.m., I asked a policeman where the Mecca was, the direction of Mecca, to pray. And the policemen, you know, just talk a little bit together, and then they pointed at the right direction of the Mecca. Then I went to another major tourist attraction, the most famous bridge of Florence, totally covered in black, and I just standed there for half an hour without saying anything, doing anything, and I was sure at this point the police will come, for sure, at least wondering what are you doing here, you know, for half an hour. Nothing happened, and then desperately, because of course I had no article to write at that point, I entered the shop, one of the, you know, most famous shops of Florence, and I asked the owner, but why you didn't even come out? I mean, nothing. And then he told me, oh, you know, because usually women like you wearing a niqab come from Saudi Arabia, and now they are the only ones who have the money to shop here, so they are our best customers. Nobody would be afraid of you. Actually, we are very sorry that you are a fake Arab woman. And this was the reaction of Christian conservative Italy.
But try to imagine if it won't be one person, but more. Can you imagine that picture? That is not just one person in jihad in Florence?
I think there's no difference. Really, as journalists, you know, and editors, especially editors, tend to, you know, exaggerate and to create these fears. And like, if somebody from Poland, a journalist, yesterday sent me some questions for an interview, and the first questions was about these refugees and the Islamization of Europe. Well, these are the middle class, these are secular, and there is no danger of Islamization. And actually, one interesting thing, I come from Iraq, I was in Iraq in the last days. This wave of refugees, of course, is a problem for countries like Syria and Iraq, because the middle class is leaving, and who is going to rebuild these countries? This is what happened in Iraq. Iraq doesn't exist anymore, because only the poorest and only the most religious people remain in Iraq, and it will be the same in Syria without the middle class. So they were quite upset. Young Syrian and Iraqi activists, because they said, you know, I remember one activist from Homs in Syria, he told me, you think in Europe you believe that you are finally helping Syria, while now you are really destroying it, because now you are taking all the middle class. So, okay, now Syria doesn't exist. He was referring to, you know, the fragmentation of Syria among many rebel groups, but now Syrians don't exist anymore.
I have another question to you, but before that, I would like to ask Dimitris to complete this picture of the European generosity.
Okay, from what everybody understood, I tried to see the glass semi-full. I try. I think this is what the nuance of our difference lies on. Listen, I never spoke about generosity, obviously. I am a little bit more reluctant and relative in the way I will picture the whole frame. What I say, and I think that we will agree here, is that the dominant idea which was based that we are building a Europe which will isolate itself from the rest of the world seems that it cannot work anymore, it cannot deliver anymore. And why is that? Not because the European Union and the member state became better, but because reality obliges to do so. So, what was the dominant idea until very, very recently? Of course, it is there, but it is not as strong as it was before. The idea was based on the assumption that if we make, the more difficult we make the entrance of this population to the European Union, the less they will do it. The more difficult we will make their lives within our countries, the less will come. These are things that, of course, you cannot say in public. A few European leaders had the courage to do so, and particularly the extreme right. So the idea is that if we manage to make it difficult for them, they will not do it. The result is that they do it. Less, maybe, than what would the original number be, but people take the risk of crossing the Aegean Sea, of crossing the Mediterranean Sea, which is even much more hard to do so, because their lives is a nightmare. So, let's try to deconstruct this idea. First, as I said, and as a big part of the dominant elites within the European Union, and particularly the European Commission here, they have admitted that this system does not function. This system will not deliver. This is a failure. The second consideration, which is always there, is an economic, a financial consideration. This system costs a lot. Of course, there are a lot of people who will tell you that the European Union pays deliberately money to specific institutions that will undertake the protection and the militarization of the EU external borders. But the truth is that there is too much money for not much delivery. The third argument, which I think it is still a functionable argument, is an argument that has a value, is a value argument. I mean, you cannot use human life as a means of achieving a political target. I mean, ever since Immanuel Kant, European modernity is claiming that human life is a value per se. Of course, hypocrisy is there. I take every argument that I understand is present, but the combination of these three arguments have functioned at the perspective of deconstructing this domination of the absolutely restrictive approach on migration. And that is something which brings us in a much better situation to discuss the matter today than the situation we were last year or even 6 months ago. Acknowledging, of course, that I agree with the most of the considerations about the European hypocrisy, the European generosity, and so on.
Francesca,
as I said, I want to see it a little bit full.
I asked you who is coming to Europe, and the intention of my question was to understand of who we are afraid.
What do you mean? Who?
I mean that we are afraid of the terrorists. We are afraid of the wave of the Muslims, and actually, I think it's not true, or not. I don't know. Maybe I am wrong, but
well, it's strange for me to speak about Muslims and Arab culture, and because it's almost 10 years that I live in the Middle East. And even if I'm European, I'm not. But it's great to live in the Middle East, despite it all. It's great because the Arab culture is amazing. I'm secular and everything, but it's amazing. And maybe because I come from Southern Europe, and of course, when you are from Italy, from Greece, it's the Mediterranean. There's nothing to say. Not only I'm not afraid at all. Well, first of all, consider that the point is that we don't know anything about, we don't know anything about Islam, we don't know anything about Sharia law. We speak about things that we don't know. For example, how many of you imagine that, and know that, for example, in Palestine, Sharia law is already in the constitution, and, if many activists go to Palestine, so that's why I'm mentioning Palestine, because Palestine looks secular. I'm not speaking of Gaza, I'm speaking of the West Bank, of Ramallah, which is like Tel Aviv, now. And there is a Sharia law in force in Ramallah. Nobody would ever imagine. It's like the Sharia law in force in Egypt. Sharia law means so many things, and I'm saying this as a secular person. I'm not afraid of the Sharia law in general. I'm afraid, of course, of some particular interpretation of Sharia law, which are totally, this is a minority, and it's also well known that the majority of Muslims are rejecting any way they can these radical interpretations of Islam. And actually it was very interesting when I was in Iraq speaking with young Iraqis, especially with young Iraqis actually, and they told me, when I told them, but you are not escaping from war areas, because this also, as a former human rights officer, this is also something interesting under a legal point of view, because if tomorrow one of the commissions for refugees, examine all the applications, well, if you come from Turkey, if you come from Jordan, you are not entitled to asylum in Europe, strictly speaking, because you are not coming from a war area. And the point is, they told me, it's not a matter of war. We are tired of the society here. We are tired of this role of religion, which is not we are tired of religion at all, because it's like really, I mean, Islam is also a culture, it's not only a religion. The point is, they are tired of this obsession of religion. It's really a society, and it's not only religion, I would say that it's also the traditions, the authority of fathers, the authority of men, the authority of old people over young people, all together. They are really tired of this Middle East, and this is not only Syria, it's not only Iraq, it's really everywhere, where actually you are not free. And then the difference, of course, compared to the past, is that now you are on Facebook, you are on Twitter, you see how other young people next to you in Europe live. And so these people who are coming here, you know, I don't want to say they are secular, because I don't want to say that, you know, we should accept them all only if they are secular. It's simply people, not only I'm not afraid of them at all, because I know them, it's something more. I hope that they will enrich our society, because honestly, one of the reasons I live in the Middle East is that the society, when you, of course for a foreigner is easier, but when you forget all these negative aspects, for example, the generosity of the Arab culture is amazing. It's something that we don't have anymore in Europe. The attention, the care for the other is something amazing. There are so many things that I hope we will learn from all these Arab migrants. I'm not afraid at all. I mean, I hope. And then, honestly, as a young Southern European, you know, for me, most of the times I'm asked why I still go back to Syria, if I'm not afraid, and, well, I would lie, you know, to say I'm not afraid. I'm more than afraid, I'm terrified now, I mean, when I'm in Syria. But the point is that still, it's a honor to be with Syrians, with Iraqis, with young Arabs, because this is the generation of the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring, except for dictators, except for the violations of human rights, was born for the same reasons, you know, that was the same crisis of Europe, of our generation, which is a generation with no rights at all, I mean, totally excluded from society, with such a high level of unemployment. And the difference is that we didn't have the courage to speak out, and they had. So for me, you know, I hope that we will get something of their courage and their dignity. Yesterday was Friday, and in Aleppo still there was the usual Friday peace demonstration under airstrikes and under everything. And the only difference compared to the past, that at the beginning the Friday demonstration, always peaceful, were against Bashar al-Assad, then against Bashar al-Assad and against the rebels, then also against the Islamic State. Yesterday was also against Russia. But this is the only difference. Still they have the courage to, you know, speak out and peacefully, which is something that's amazing for me.
The people that are reaching Europe, what are the expectations of them? Because as we said already, they're all middle class, they are engineers, they are doctors. What are the expectations, and if we are prepared to reach their expectation? This is the question for you.
The expectation, always a migrant who, and here I include the refugee, who decides to leave his country because he's pushed to do so for whatever necessity, the expectations are relatively higher than what the country of destination is able to fulfill. And that is, again, not something which is particular to the Syrian flows today, but that is the case with all migrants. I'm coming from a country that has seen 100,000 extremely qualified Greek children, I mean young people at the age of 25 to 30, leaving Greece. Why? Because they have some expectations of dignity today that they cannot fulfill in the country. I'm sure that these expectations will not be fulfilled. After the end of the Cold War, you very well know here, for example, and in other countries, that people who were qualified enough left their countries of origin, and they went to work as cleaners, you know, in Western European capitals or in the United States. So what we have with the Syrians today is a follow-up of this pattern. I mean, people who have studied, as we said, you know, an engineer of Damascus, he will end up somewhere in Germany, and of course he will not be an engineer in Germany. So of course he will not be delighted for that, but that is something that he will have to live with, and this is the particular difficulty of the first generation of migrants. I mean, the first generation, the people who really migrate, are the ones who have to swallow, and they are the ones that have to incorporate this radical shift in their lives. The problem comes with the second generation, the guys, the kids who are born in the country of destination of the parents and do not compare their life programs with their parents' programs, but compare their life programs with the programs of the youth of the country they live in. This is where the challenge starts to be different, and this, of course, this challenge is not that much a challenge which has to do with migration management, but has to do with social policies of cohesion in our countries. So what we face today is not an exception. It can be very easily classified in the history of migration flows as far as its main patterns is concerned.
I don't know if there are any questions.
I just wanted to say one last word before the question, because I wanted to make the point, and that is the following. We tend to conceptualize migration as an accident, as something that went wrong somewhere, and migration delivers negative effects as an accident. If we look back in human history, we will see that migration is far from an accident. Migration is the norm, because people have been always migrating, and migration is still an exception because people do not like to migrate, people do not like to leave their houses. I mean, if you decide to leave your house, that means that you've reached a level that you cannot do otherwise. But it is not an accident. Seeing migration from a short distance makes you feel that it is an accident. You know, we believe today, okay, something went wrong in Syria, and if this recovers, then we will return to our pre-refugee crisis normality. Nothing more wrong than that. One of the major tasks that the European member states should give to themselves, the European government should give to themselves, is to acknowledge and familiarize the European people that this will be a part of our new normality. And this is not an exception anymore. It is a part of a new normality. I hear some politicians say it's not our fault that the Westerns went to Syria and Syria is completely dismantled as a state. It's not our fault that Iraq is not a state anymore, meaning that we carry no responsibility of managing migration and refugee flows from this country. I'm sorry, I don't buy this argument. When you have a refugee at the door of your house, it's as if you have a victim of a rape who is there and who knocks your door because she believes that if she stays outside, she will be raped again. And you open the door and you say, I'm sorry, it's not my fault. No, you take the woman inside and you take care of her. And this is why you do, this is the moral responsibility vis-à-vis the refugee. And that is a moral responsibility that we should do our maximum to preserve. Of course, if your house is in a location where all the raped women come to your house and they do not go to next door, you have the moral right to go to your neighbor and tell him, listen, maybe we should share the responsibility because I have no room in my house for all these women who are raped. But this is something that you will do additionally to the moral obligation of welcoming the raped woman. And that is how I say things. I start, sorry, last word. The first people who taught migration to the world, the first ones to migrate, were the Europeans. We Europeans not only have been migrating, But ever since we have been migrating, we have been ruling also the countries we migrated at. I usually start my course at the university on migration by showing the kids 3 pictures. The first picture is JFK, and I ask where the guy is from, and they say United States, and I correct them, and I say to them Ireland. The second picture is Fidel Castro. Where Fidel is from? He's from Cuba? No, he's from Galicia, the poorer region of Spain. And then we have the latest example of Dilma Rousseff, the president of the most strong country in Latin America, Brazil, who of course is not Brazilian. Her father migrated in the 30s from Gabrovo, a small poor village in southern Bulgaria. So this guy is not only migrated, but they're ruling their countries now, their new countries. So imagine that our countries not only welcome or familiarize with the idea of coexistence with all these guys, but in the future they will be ruled. So I'm not talking about being ruled by migrants. I'm talking about a fair historical deal of Europe vis-à-vis its neighbors, vis-à-vis its history, and vis-à-vis its geography.
Journalists in September, we were asked not to write migrants anymore, but to write refugees, like a politically correct word. Now, I understand the reason, which is, let's explain readers that we have some rights, some duties under international law. They have some rights under international law. Okay, I understand this was the main reason, but the point is, I can't write refugees, because the point is, I myself am a migrant, and there is no war in Italy. So I can't say, yes, you have to open your doors to those who are escaping a war, and all the others, like, for example, all the young people from Kosovo that now Germany is sending back from the Balkans. No, because there is no war in Kosovo, no, there is no war in Serbia. Makes no sense, because in any case, honestly, of course, I'm a war correspondent, so probably, of course I have to work abroad, but I didn't leave Italy because I'm a war correspondent. Honestly, I think that in any case, it's just because I'm a curious person, nothing else, just because I like to travel, I like to see other things, so I'm a migrant myself. It would be really hypocrisy. And consider that in Italy already we have more emigrants than migrants. Last year, for the first time, my generation is leaving. And again, the point is that we want simply the right to leave and to come back. If we leave these people, these Syrians, Iraqis, Afghans, free to leave and also to come back, would be the most natural thing, because not all of them are very happy to come to Europe. Consider that for me, for example, even if I love the Middle East, and I somehow feel at home in the Middle East, still I'm very European, and I don't think I will spend all my life in the Middle East at all. Still I'm a foreigner. It's not easy for me to stay in the Middle East. I mean, and the same is for them. It's not because you have a kebab shop on the corner that you feel at home. I mean, the culture is very different. And for us, for war journalists, we have all these translators, drivers on the field that are, invaluable for us. And when the situation on the field is very dangerous and we try to convince them to flee, or at least, to stay in Turkey for a while, or in Jordan or in Lebanon until things improve on the ground, it's impossible to convince them to leave their country. People really don't want to leave unless they're really forced to leave. And then there are people like me who would leave in any case, after 1 year, 6 months, I would leave any place, just because that's how I am.
But do you believe that they're gonna back in Syria, because all the refugees
most of them.
But I think they don't believe that they will be able to come back, because they have no houses anymore, no country anymore, and this war seems to be endless. So all the refugees I met...
No, when we say this war seems endless, you are from Poland, most of you. Come on, look at Warsaw. This is what Aleppo will be someday. You will walk around Aleppo and it will be like walking around Warsaw today, which is not walking around like walking in Beirut, for example, because in Beirut you feel the war, still today. Warsaw is a miracle, honestly. It's an amazing city. Because the way you have been able to keep the past alive in your memory and to go on, even if the city doesn't exist anymore, is something I think exceptional. And that's why when I was in Poland in April, I was supposed to stay here for 3 days and I ended up staying 3 weeks. Because Warsaw for me was really, come on, one day Aleppo will be like this. So it's not an endless war and people will rebuild Aleppo, will rebuild Syria like you did in Poland. You went all away, you are still here.
Czy są jakieś pytania? Nie wiem, czy ktoś... Może dam... Albo podać.
Joanna, University of Reading. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you very, very much for this talk. It was really nice and eye-opening and so different from what you get to hear on the media normally. I live in the UK and like you, Francesca, I'm a migrant. I've lived abroad for most of my life, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And I wonder, because you get to hear in many different countries these days that governments are willing to accept refugees, but they're not willing to accept migrants who come for a better life. How does it make sense economically for these countries, I wonder? Because when you have refugees, maybe this is a very trivial question, and maybe I'm getting the whole concept wrong, but when you have refugees, you have to look after them in refugee camps, you have to identify their legal status. They're not really allowed to work depending on the country that they're settled in. Whereas if you have migrants that come in to work to get a better life, they actually contribute to the society. And so they are useful members of the community who can produce more income for, well, they can look after themselves, but they can also increase the country's economy. So I was wondering if you could shed some light on this. And another question, if I may, is, if you ruled Europe, and if you could do anything you wanted about the migrant crisis, what would you do? What would be your first step? Thank you.
Well, look at Turkey. Turkey has both kinds of Syrians, because now in Turkey there are more or less 2 million Syrians, refugees, registered with the UNHCR, with the United Nations, most of them in camps. And then you have, these are estimates, but more or less other 1.5 million Syrians around the country, mostly in Istanbul, living on their own. The first Syrians who went to Turkey with, money enough to stay, and most of them opened new businesses, in Turkey. So you really have the both examples. And Turkey, okay, now is a difficult moment for Turkey. Honestly, I would say, as a journalist who will be arrested again soon, because it's becoming impossible to work in Turkey, is because of the, strange shift of Erdogan. It's not because of the economy. Okay, the economy is now is not performing very well, but the contribution of Syrians to the Turkish economy was amazing at the beginning. So now, things are changing not because of the burden of Syria, because of this, this quest for power from Erdogan. So it's not because of Syrians. What I could do, if I would open the door, because natural flow of migrants would, fix everything on themselves. Migration is really a natural thing. The point is, of course, it's very easy for Italians and also for Greece. When I was in Athens in September, it's very easy for us because we know that our country is just a country of transition for migrants. So it's very easy to be nice with migrants when you know that they are going north. So it's true that, of course, if I think, for example, my parents, just the upper class in Italy, Of course, you know, they live in an amazing place in Italy, and it's very easy for them to be leftist and to be very open with migrants, because they will never see a migrant close to their home, never. So you should, you know, think of people who already live in the suburbs because then there is, you know, there is the competition between poor Europeans and migrants. So I'm not saying that, you know, open the door and leave to. Of course, you know, you need social policies, but it's nothing new. I mean, it's really, migration is really nothing new.
On the point you raised, on the distinction between refugees and irregular economic migrants or whatever, I was a month ago. I was at the Greek-Macedonian border, where you have a passage of the, you know, of the people who go through the railway from Greece to Macedonia, and I was at the Macedonian side, and I met some volunteers there who were dealing with the refugees, and in front of my eyes, a young Syrian guy, 30 years old, asked the young teacher from Skopje, "What is your salary here?" And the teacher said, 170 euros per month. And then the Syrian refugee said, "Then you shall come with us." This shows exactly that in practice, the radical differentiation between you know, refugees and migrants is not that obvious today. The term of refugee has been legally constructed after the World War II, where you had really refugees, people who left their territories because they were persecuted. As years go by, it seems that this radical differentiation will lose its normative consequences. And then our countries will have to face again, in an honest, sincere way, I hope for them and for us, new deals of managing this population. Could it be a regulated procedure of registration of this population within the European Union? Should that be a politics which is based on the idea of collective responsibility, solidarity? I don't know, you can call it whatever. I don't know. That is the good scenario, because the bad scenario is to build fences all around Europe and to pretend that by building fences we will solve the problem. And the result will be that we will create, I don't know how many fences, and still the problem will persist. So, and plus Europe, I think, should know not to construct fences. At least Europe should know that. So I think this is where we are. We are facing a dilemma. I was interviewed right before this session, and I had to answer the question, what is the main risk, what is the main threat today? The threat is not the refugee crisis. The threat is the way certain Europeans regard the refugee crisis. The threat in Europe are not refugees. Refugees are a problem, of course. I'm not saying that they're no problem. But we can deal with this problem. Where we're going to face the most ugly part of our own historical legacy is if we let the fences to be constructed, and if we give vital political space to the extreme right, by adopting, by familiarizing ourselves with the main extreme right patterns of political behavior. That's the problem. Our threat is ourselves.
But I think that there is a distinction between, yeah, there is.
Thank you. Giulio Ercolesi from the European Liberal Forum, the think tank organization of the ALDE party, the European Liberal Party. I fully agree with, basically, with what has been said about the treatment of the problem of migrations in general. And I would also add that I'm fully convinced of the mostly positive economic consequences of migration. Yet I think that there is another aspect of the problem that is usually underplayed by those advocating liberal policy on migration, and that is that mainly deals with religion. By the way, Professor Christopoulus said, what was John F. Kennedy's nationality? He was not an American, he was an Irish. Well, he was not an Irish. He was an American, especially from the point of view of the ethical political values of America versus those of Ireland concerning state-religion separation. John F. Kennedy would have never been elected President of the United States in the early 60s if he had had the same ideas that the Irish mostly had in that period, where they were led by an obscurantism, very old-fashioned Catholic fundamentalism. It's very different from Ireland today, of course. So, and by the way, we must be very careful when dealing with these problems, because if we connect culture with the ethnic origin, that is quite near to the idea of racism, the biological Herderian idea of national identity that was typical of German Romanticism and gave birth to Nazism in the end, when it was carried on very consistently. So, as much as John F. Kennedy was an American and had no Irish background concerning some basic principles of liberal democracy, we should have the same cautious attitude towards those who come from non-secularized societies, such as most of the Arab societies. I know that most of the people who come to Europe, not most, but a very huge number, are camouflaged secularists who are simply fed up with religion in the Islamic world. There is a huge number of Arab atheists, and I think 80% of the gay population of Maghreb that are camouflaging themselves in the great economic wave of migration, and are not free to say, not even when they arrive here, that they are atheists or gay, because they are afraid of the reaction of their own communities and families. If you go in Brussels, there's plenty of advertising in the metro. Are you a gay from the Arab countries or countries of Muslim origin? This is the helpline, call us. Now, it is not right downplaying the problems that religious intolerance is posing almost everywhere. Not only in the Arab world, of course. My country, Italy, like Poland, like Ireland, have been for centuries the victim of religious intolerance by the Catholics. But now in our world, no one is going to jail for blasphemy, no one is going to jail for apostasy. Now you said that, you, Federica, said that in the Palestinian Authority there is Sharia law, and yet there is a certain degree of freedom. Have you ever heard about Walid al-Husseini? Sorry for the pronunciation. He was a 25 years old guy in Ramallah who was sentenced to jail, not in Gaza, but by the Palestinian Authority for the crime of apostasy, for abandoning the Islamic religion. And he is now a refugee in France, where he published a book published by one of the most important French publishers, Grasset, whose title is Blasphémateur, where he explains why he is a refugee in France after being persecuted by the Palestinian Authority for abandoning the Islamic faith. Now, we shouldn't downplay these problems. We can't abandon, as Italy, for example, is doing, the integration policies of the immigrants, not from the economic point of view, but from the cultural point of view, to the so-called inter-religious dialogue, where Catholic cardinals, together with self-appointed open fundamentalist imams, try to deal with the problems of the welfare state that is missing for the migrant population, and do as if these were not problems. We also are helping the most reactionary part of Islam if we downplay these problems. We put together those who are escaping because they are secularist in a deeply religious, non-secular, intolerant environment. As was our environment, we forgot it always until half a century ago. Half a century ago, the Catholic countries of Italy, of Europe, were intolerant against those who were not Catholic and who advocated a secular state. Now, the situation is the same. We should not put all the things on the same level, because otherwise we play the game of reactionary Islam against those who want reform in Islam and against those who are as secularist as we are. Sorry for being so long.
You want to answer, Francesca?
When you were about to finish, I asked the moderator how much time we have, and she said 5 minutes. So I think that we cannot even tackle the problem you raise in 5 minutes. What from my side I can say is that I get the point, although I'm extremely skeptical with the idea that our new dogma of secularism will, in the French way, try to absorb and get rid of anything which could be regarded as a threat to that. So, as we say, we keep the recipe, but the recipe sometimes need to be flexible in order to be more functional. And I think you get it, you understand what I mean. So, because I see sometimes in liberal surroundings a straightforward fanaticism vis-à-vis the idea of dealing with Islam that I do not share. I'm not meaning that I put you in this pattern, but I have been following a way which, in my eyes, will not be very productive when it comes to policy making. As far as the discussion about nation, of course, you're right. My point was not to bring the discussion about the romanticism or organic perception of nation, which is the one you mentioned. My point about saying that JFK is from Ireland was to tackle the idea that the Europeans have been moving, and we need to understand that some others will come to our places. I agree that handling Islam today is not an easy task, and I also stand for the idea that everybody, regardless of what they have been through in their lives, have the moral responsibility and the intellectual maturity to be responsible about their acts and their omissions. And this is my answer to the way, which strategy needs to be followed when we need to deal with this population. I think you have some points also to matter.
Yeah, I'm not afraid at all of Islam, because, yes, of course, Palestine is not a heaven, not because of Islam, honestly, because of the occupation, of Israeli occupation, which is at the midst of most, not all, but most of Palestinian problems. I have a difficult relationship now with Hamas. I wrote some investigative pieces on how Hamas makes profit from the siege, from tunnels. So I mean, it's never black and white, but yes, of course, I know you know the case in Palestine you mentioned, but I could reply, okay, what about Israel, where the constitution is the Torah? We don't go anywhere in this way. The point is, I mean, I'm not afraid of religion, and I don't pretend that people that come here or people from here, I mean, are secular. As a secular person, I don't have any problem at all with religion, because, I mean, what I see in Syria, or I've been embedded twice with Islamic State, what I see with this kind of groups is not religion at all. So I'm more interested in trying to understand what is behind really the political game and the power politics that is behind what these kind of radical groups call religion. That's why I'm not afraid at all of Islam or Christianity or Judaism or whatever.
I think we don't have time more, so we have to finish at this point. Thank you very much.